On today's episode, I'm reacting to all the Week 6 matchups, plus Week 6 fantasy studs, coming right up. What's up, everyone? You're listening to the Gridiron Fantasy Football Podcast for Monday, October 19th, 2020. And I'm Chip, I'm your host, and thank you so much for joining us today. If you're a new listener, thank you so much for listening in. If you'd like to share our podcast, you can find us over on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. If you'd like to watch us, you can watch us over on YouTube at Gridiron Fantasy Football. So, please support the show, hit subscribe, hit the bell so you don't miss any more episodes. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about all the Week 6 matchups, my reactions to all the matchups, plus all the fantasy studs. Before we get into the matchups, though, we got some news to go over. Big news coming out of Philadelphia. Two players got injured yesterday. Zach Ertz his ankle. He will be out 3 to 4 weeks. The report came out this morning from Chris Martinson from ESPN, and looks like he's going to be out for 34 weeks with a high ankle sprain, which is another weapon that's going to be taken away from Carson Wentz. And then running back Miles Sanders had an MRI on his knee this morning, and he dodged a bullet. It looks like he's only going to miss 1 to 2 weeks. The Eagles have a Thursday night game this week, so for him to play this week was a stretch. So it looks like he could be back Week 8 against the Cowboys, but this means that for this week at least, Boston Scott and Corey Clement are going to be the ones who can take the load in the backfield. So something to prioritize your waiver wire if you're a Miles Sanders owner. With the fact that he dodged a bullet and is not too injured with his knee, it looks like, do you want to spend a lot of fab on him? But I'll talk about that more in tomorrow's episode. But and then Tennessee Titans tight end Jonnu Smith, he left the game early with the ankle injury. The reports are indicating that it's a minor injury and he should play Sunday against the Eagles. But if you're wondering why he had such a bad game yesterday, is because he left early with the ankle injury, which let the backup tight end for the Tennessee Titans blow up yesterday. So just a couple injuries that at least it sucks. Every week we're getting injuries, and it sucks that we're seeing big names go out every single week. But at least these are not season-ending injuries. At least there are injuries that will allow the player to come back in a few weeks. And then on top of that, Christian McCaffrey, possibility that he will come back either this week or next week from his high ankle sprain. So Mike Davis, if you're a Mike Davis owner, you may only get one more week, if that, from him before McCaffrey comes back. So just some details about all the injuries that took place yesterday. And so let's go on to all the top plays. Every Monday, I like to go over all the top plays for Week 6. So yesterday, this segment is all Derrick Henry. So right now, Derrick Henry, as of Monday morning, the fastest ball carrier goes to Derrick Henry. He topped the speed of 21.62 miles per hour on his 94-yard touchdown run. Dude's a monster. One play would win your fantasy week if you had him. I mean, he scored 40 points, so dude was just a baller yesterday. And then the longest play goes to Derrick Henry again. He ran a total of 114.2 yards on his 94-yard touchdown run. So he has the top spot so far on offense. And then improbable completion. So Deshaun Watson threw to Randall Cobb for a 4-yard touchdown reception and only had a completion percentage of 16.8%. So still kind of hovering in that mid-teen percentage for the last couple of weeks, the completion percentage. And then the remarkable rush goes to Derrick Henry again. He on his 94-yard touchdown run, he was only expected to gain 5 yards, and he ran 89 yards more than expected. So obviously a good day for Derrick Henry when it comes to the top plays for Week 6. And then the fastest sack, that goes to Trey Flowers of the Detroit Lions. He sacked the quarterback in 2.7 seconds. So pretty crazy to think that, based on if you watch the Packers and Bucs game, I mean, they're getting after Aaron Rodgers really quick. So I was surprised that Trey Flowers was the one who got to the quarterback the fastest this week. But with that being the case, let's go into all the matchups. And the first matchup I'm going to go over is the Houston Texans versus the Tennessee Titans. This game was a crazy game. This game was back and forth all game. And if you had fantasy starters in this game, you weren't disappointed unless you had Jonnu Smith. But the Titans won this game 42-36. Deshaun Watson had 4 touchdowns. He had 335 yards passing. Ryan Tannehill had a great game, 364 yards and 4 touchdowns as well. Like I mentioned, Derrick Henry had a massive game. King Henry had 212 yards and 2 touchdowns, and obviously his best run was the 94-yard touchdown that he had. And I don't know, man. Derrick Henry, he came into the league. Everyone was excited about him. He wasn't really doing anything much in his first couple years. And the last 2 seasons, though, he has turned it on to be one of the top backs in this league. It's still crazy to think a guy that's so massive can be such a force running the ball. I mean, he did it yesterday, obviously on the ground, but then he had a really nice reception as well that went for a long gain. Like that overtime possession for the Titans was all Derrick Henry. So crazy to look at, how well he's doing, as him being like a late bloomer. But Derrick Henry continues to be a monster. And now he gets the Steelers in week 7, so that might be a tougher test based on the Steelers defense. But they lost Bush. The Steelers lost their linebacker, so that may change things a little bit. But at wide receiver, I mean, Will Fuller had another 100-yard game. He had a touchdown, so he continues to be consistent. Same with Brandon Cooks. 2 weeks in a row, Brandon Cooks has scored a touchdown. A.J. Brown, another wide receiver who's been pretty consistent since he came back. He was 5 for 56 for 2 touchdowns. So, A.J. Brown, everyone's high on him this year. He got hurt in the first game of the season. He came back, and so far he's doing well for you if he's in your fantasy line, which he should be. And like I said, the only person that didn't do well yesterday was Jonnu Smith. He was 1 for 13 without a touchdown. But what's crazy about this game, so we know that Mike Vrabel is a coach from the New England Patriots, right? So we know that even last year during the playoffs, he took out some tricks to figure out how to save time on the clock. And yesterday, he purposely, there's like 3 minutes left in the game, just over 3 minutes left in the game, and the Houston Texans are about to score. And he knew that there's that score was going to happen, or there's a high percentage that it was going to happen because they couldn't stop the Texans at all. So he purposely put a player on the field, defensive player on the field, to get a 12-man on the field penalty to stop the clock, and it saved them a bunch of time where they were able to go back, get the ball, and go back and score and tie the game up. Just when the announcers were watching or announcing the game, they're like, why did he do that? That seems like a very brain fart to a coach to throw a player on the field. But looking at it and then dissecting the play, it was on purpose to get the penalty, to stop the clock, get them closer to the end zone while they'll score, or so they can get the ball back. So, sometimes you wonder why coaches make certain decisions, and Mike Vrabel, man, he definitely outcoached and outsmarted the Texans on that play, because everyone was kind of figuring out why that was the case and why he did that. But kudos to him. The Tennessee Titans were able to win this game. And then going on to the Bengals versus the Colts. The Colts won this game 31-27. Big game from Phillip Rivers. Phillip Rivers has been a dud all season. It looked like he was hindering this offense. I mean, he did throw for 371 yards and a touchdown, but the Colts were able to get this win. It sucks for Joe Burrow because Joe Burrow had the ball and a chance to win the game. He threw an interception at the end of the game, but it's one of those things where those are growing pains for a quarterback. Honestly, Joe Burrow didn't do too bad against the number 1 pass defense. So this matchup was concerning from a fantasy standpoint because of the matchup, but he did well. I think for a rookie, I think he did pretty good against the Colts defense. Average games from Joe Mixon and Jonathan Taylor. Joe Mixon went out early because of a foot injury. He came back after half, but he did his damage in the first half. He had a touchdown, but he did get a touchdown taken away from him based on Giovanni Bernard being in there. But, Joe Burrow had a touchdown as well rushing. So, Joe Mixon could have had a bigger game, but, it's one of those things where it just didn't fall that way this game. But great game from Trey Burton. He had 2 total touchdowns. He had a rushing touchdown and a passing touchdown. He benefited from Mo Alley Cox being out. Jack Doyle was not really a factor. Looked like Trey Burton was going to be the guy that, while Mo Alley Cox is out, will be the guy who will step in that role. But good game from him. Zach Pascal, he scored a touchdown as well. Trying to figure out this Colts, wide receiver group. We know T.Y. Hilton has good talent. We know that he's been struggling ever since Andrew Luck has retired. But then you look at what happened this week. He did have, we saw that T.Y. Hilton had a touchdown taken away from him on a penalty. So that was encouraging to see, but still he has not, scored a touchdown yet this year. But I still feel like if you're a T.Y. Hilton owner, just try to hold on to him if you can to see if things change after the bye week and see if he gets more implemented to the offense. Because, like I said, it's really T.Y. Hilton and Zach Pascal. So, like, I wouldn't want to get rid of a number one wide receiver. I understand he should be a guy that's on your bench. I don't think you should start T.Y. Hilton. I think he's a guy that he's too volatile right now to figure out. But if he hits your waiver wire, more than likely he's going to be picked up, and you don't want that to happen. So I think if you do have better options, try for those. But I think T.Y. Hilton is still a sit for me on your roster. And then going on to the Falcons versus the Vikings. The Falcons came up and showed up this game. We won this game against the Vikings 40-23. Matt Ryan finally woke up this year. He had 371 yards and four touchdowns. For me, Matt Ryan was a sit amongst a lot of people analyzing this game because Matt Ryan, like I said, he had not scored a touchdown in 11 quarters. But Julio Jones was back, and I whiffed on this one. To be honest, I thought Julio Jones was not going to be very effective because we saw what happened last week where he left the game early with a hamstring injury. I felt like he came back too quickly. And then this game, no issue, right? He actually was joking after the game. He was walking with the trainer with his arm around him and like limping. Everyone's like, what's going on? And then he was just making a joke. But he finished this game completely healthy. I mean, he had 8 receptions for 137 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, I figure out the piece of this offense goes to Julio Jones. If Julio Jones is in the lineup, Matt Ryan is a startable player. And I think that it helps with Hayden Hurst. That helps with Calvin Ridley, obviously Russell Gage. But yeah, I think we found what makes this team click in the passing game is Julio Jones. But on the other side of the ball, Kirk Cousins, man, he finally had a decent. He almost had a 30-point fantasy outing yesterday, but he did throw for 343 yards and 3 touchdowns. However, he started the game with 3 interceptions, so he turned that around very quickly. However, because of the game script, the way things were going in passing and offense, really, if you start Alexander Mattison, I had to start him because I'm a Dalvin Cook owner. He was a bust yesterday. Unexpected, but I think because of the game script, they were down for so much so quickly. They had to stay away from the running game, which caused Madison to have a really bad game. And there were a couple times that they had the ball at the goal line, which they put in Michael Boone, which is frustrating. But overall, I mean, Madison did not do anything for you, which everyone felt like the matchup, the talent, all meshed for him to have a good game. He didn't have one. So if you played him, I played him. It hurt me in my fantasy week this week, but the good thing is they have a bye week this week, and Dalvin Cook comes back in week 8, so that's encouraging. Todd Gurley had a really quiet game, but like I said, when the passing game is doing so well like the Falcons did, it's hard to be mad about that. I mean, Gurley has been having a decent season so far, and this is the one game because of the passing game doing so well that he didn't do well. But like I said, Julio Jones balled out, really scored. Hayden Hurst scored. Justin Jefferson, massive game from him. He continues to be one of the best waiver wire pickups for this year. He had 2 touchdowns and he scored almost 40 PPR points. So great game from him. He was 9 for 166 and 2. So if you have him on your team, kudos to you because he balled out after having a bad game last week against the Seahawks. Now moving on to the Broncos versus the Patriots. This was a hard game to watch. I was watching the Red Zone all day yesterday, and I have the Patriots defense. I was hoping for a bigger game from the Patriots defense, but they only allowed field goals. So, I mean, can't get mad about that. But the Broncos were able to beat the Patriots 18-12. Ugly game by Cam Newton. It's his first game back from being on the COVID list. Threw 2 interceptions. He did have a rushing touchdown, but that whole New England offense was just completely just overwhelmed yesterday. The Broncos were getting pressure. They just couldn't really do anything. Philip Lindsay, he had over 100 yards rushing, so it was a good game by him. Tim Patrick had a good game. He was 4 for 101. I felt like this was going to happen because the Patriots now had to take away the number 1 wide receiver. Stephon Gilmore was back in this game. Jerry Jeudy is their number 1 threat. They took him away, which gave Tim Patrick the opportunity, so I felt like that was a good play if you had Tim Patrick based on the matchup. But the number 1 fantasy person for this game was Brandon McManus, like the kicker for the Broncos, like 6 for 6 on field goals, scored about 20-something fantasy points. So this was the guy to have in fantasy if you were had played anybody in this game, but crazy to see the kickers score so many points this week. And then going on to Washington versus the Giants. Giants won this game 20-19. This was another hard game to watch. Daniel Jones, Kyle Allen, they both had touchdowns, but it just wasn't really, you weren't starting these guys in fantasy anyways, but if knowing the offense and everything like that, and knowing, the Washington has a good defense, like it was just really hard to start Daniel Jones, but the good thing is he did lead the team in rushing, right? He led the team in rushing yards. He had 7 attempts for like 75 yards, so a good rushing game from him. Devontae Freeman, he continues to be the lead back. So the transition happened last week. This week he had 18 carries for 61 yards. He didn't have a score, but it was one of those things where that's good to see. That's good to see him involved, but because Daniel Jones is a running quarterback, it kind of takes away his upside a little bit because they have designed plays for Daniel Jones to run the ball. But at least it's encouraging to see him get so many carries. And then Terry McLaurin on the Washington side of the ball, he was 7 for 74. So if you have him in a PPR league, he had you an average PPR game, so not terrible. But if you have him in standard leagues, I have him in a dynasty league that's a standard league. Didn't really do much for me. So a tough game for Terry McLaurin. But Darius Slayton, he scored a touchdown, so he definitely had a decent game if you played him in the flex. But overall, not very many fancy options and outcomes for this game. And then going on to the Ravens versus the Eagles. The Ravens won this game 30-28. I think overall this was a good game, based on just the lack of options the Eagles have compared in the Ravens. This game was definitely a mismatch on paper based on the Ravens offense versus the Eagles defense. But, credit to Carson Wentz and the Eagles coming back and trying to win that game. But, Lamar Jackson had a great game. He had 300 total yards and 2 touchdowns. Carson Wentz, he had 3 total touchdowns, but he continues to get sacked. He got sacked 6 times yesterday. So the offensive line continues to be a problem for the Philadelphia Eagles. And the problem is that obviously they lose Miles Sanders and Zach Ertz. But on the Ravens side of the ball, Gus Edwards, he led the team with 14 carries and a touchdown. So Mark Ingram, we have J.K. Dobbins, and then Gus Edwards. This is why I stay away from this backfield. I have no idea who I want to play in this backfield. It's hard to determine that. But it looks like Gus Edwards is getting majority of the work. I'm not sure what's going on with J.K. Dobbins, but it looks like they lean on Gus Edwards a lot more. Miles Sanders, on the other hand, he had a good game. He had 9. He was 9 for 118. So he almost had 2 touchdowns. If you watch the game, he dropped a reception touchdown, and then he ran the ball. He had a 74-yard run where this is the play that he hurt his knee, that he fell at the 3-yard line and fumbled the ball, and then I can't remember who picked that up and scored a touchdown. But it's being a Miles Sanders owner, you had 2 touchdowns. You could have had, but he didn't have a bad game for you. If you're in a PPR league, but it just sucks to see him go out because he is a good player, and it sucks to see anybody get injured. But on the Eagles side of the ball, Travis Fulgham, he continues to be the guy right now. He was 6 for 75 and a touchdown. He had 10 targets, and he almost had a touchdown on a Hail Mary, earlier in the game as well. This guy's hard to determine what you want to do with him from a fantasy football standpoint because now Zach Ertz is out. They have no Miles Sanders for the Thursday night football game. He's the guy. But the problem is with him being the guy and getting much more majority of the targets, they're going to try to shut him out. So this is the guy it's hard to determine his fantasy value. Hoping Deshaun Jackson and Alshon Jeffrey come back for Thursday night football. This is why I still think Travis Fulgham has a role in this offense. I don't know if it's going to be a 10-target role because if you have, obviously this is being, optimistic. Zach Ertz comes back later on in the season. You got Dallas Goedert coming back. You got Deshaun Jackson coming back soon and Alshon Jeffrey. I feel like Travis Fulgham gets kind of washed up into that, target share. So I think right now he's a good play because he's the only option right now. But when those guys come back from injury, how does he have a role in this offense? So that's the only thing about him. But overall, he's showing up every single week for Carson Wentz. And moving on to the Browns versus Steelers. This was from a fantasy standpoint, it was a good game to watch if you're a Steelers fan, obviously. But it was 38-7. The Steelers won this game easily. But from a fantasy standpoint, it was a very hard outcome because this was supposed to be a big game for Ben Roethlisberger because of the offense, because of the way the Cleveland Browns give up on defense. This seemed like a game that Big Ben was going to have 4 passing touchdowns. However, the game script did not allow that. The Steelers went up big based on defensive turnovers and the pick 6 and all that. But it's that's how it is sometimes. I mean, sometimes game scripts don't go your way, and you don't get the opportunity to score points like you should. But like I said, bad game for Mayfield and Big Ben. Kareem Hunt had a bad game. He was kept in check from that defense. James Conner had a good game. He was 20 for 101 and a touchdown. Chase Claypool showed up again. He had 18 PPR points this week. He had a rushing touchdown. Juju continues to be almost unplayable now. James Washington had a touchdown. I'm not sure what's going on with Juju, but it seems like he is being just kept in check all season. And it looks like the guys that benefiting from it is the other receivers. So Chase Claypool, I think, becomes a decent flex for the week. I don't know what's going to go on with Juju. Hopefully he turns around, but I don't know, man. But at least if you look at what's going on with the Browns, OBJ, bad game. Jarvis Landry, bad game. Austin Hooper had a decent game. He had about 10 PPR points, but other than that, just an overall bad game for the Browns wide receivers. And then Eric Ebron, man. Like, I made a late game decision in my fantasy lineup because of the matchup. I benched Hayden Hurst, and then I added Eric Ebron because I felt like the matchup was a lot better. Wasn't sure what Hayden Hurst would be like with Julio Jones back, so I made that call. Obviously, it was the wrong call, but everything will look right on paper, and then it nips you in the butt sometimes. But Ebron, I mean, he did get overthrown for a touchdown, but it's still a disappointing outing for Eric Ebron. But overall, like I said, this was a pretty ugly game overall fantasy-wise. Now going on to the Bears for the Panthers. I mean, Bears won this game 23-16. Just a ugly game overall for Teddy Two Gloves Bridgewater. He had a great game the week before against the Atlanta Falcons, which most quarterbacks do. But a bad game if you start him. You're very disappointed in this outing by Teddy Bridgewater. Nick Foles, I mean, he didn't do much. He had a touchdown, but not much going on fantasy-wise. I think, if you play DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson, they had decent PPR games, so you weren't totally disappointed with the outcome. But you have to think, like, DJ Moore he had 11 targets. Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore look like playable pieces, obviously, every week. The upside could be capped based on the matchup, but at least the targets are there. Mike Davis had another good game. He had 18 carries for 52 yards and a touchdown, so not a bad game from him from a fantasy standpoint. And like I said earlier, with Christian McCaffrey likely coming back either this week or next week, Mike Davis is almost going to be the point where you can't play him anymore. So hopefully, if you had him, he won you some games while Christian McCaffrey was out, and hopefully that benefits you. So hopefully you can figure out your roster and determine how you want to figure out your running back position if you're not a Christian McCaffrey owner. And then going on to the Lions versus the Jags. The Lions won this game 34-16. Another weird game overall as well. The Lions, they had there's a quiet game for Matthew. I was worried about this game because I was going against Matthew Stafford and TJ Hawkinson in this game in my matchup, and I was nervous about the stack. They did connect with it. That was the two that connected for a touchdown this game, but overall Matthew Stafford had a quiet game from a fantasy standpoint. However, it's because the rushing game was doing so well, and DeAndre Swift, welcome to the NFL. He had his breakout game. I think a lot of people felt like after the bye week, he was going to be a guy that was going to be added to, the lineup in the sense of more carries. He had his breakout game. He had 14 carries for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was dropped in my Dynasty League. So someone got frustrated with him and dropped him, and I gave up all my fab for DeAndre Swift. So I'm glad that was the case. He was on my bench yesterday, but it's nice to be able to, when people get fed up with certain players, that you're to benefit, you benefit from it because of that. But I think this is the game where they transition now from Adrian Peterson to DeAndre Swift. He's too talented to be on the sidelines. Adrian Peterson did score, so they had 3 rushing touchdowns, which is why Matthew Stafford had such a low fantasy game. But DeAndre Swift, I feel like this was his coming out party, that he's going to go out and now be the lead back. At least that's my hope. But, it was good to see him finally do something. And then on the Jaguars side of the ball, from the quarterback standpoint, Gardner Minshew, he had 2 total touchdowns, so he didn't kill you yesterday in fantasy, but didn't have like that high upside game that we're hoping for. James Robinson, another bad game from James Robinson until he scored that touchdown at the late in the fourth quarter. That's what saved some people and it saved his fantasy outing because he's been a guy who was doing so well in the beginning of the season. All of a sudden, the last couple of games, it hasn't been the same. But I hope that he starts to kind of turn it on and gets more upside. But yeah, James Robinson, he did have a touchdown, so credit him for that. And then from the receiving standpoint, Kenny G, he had 4 receptions for 105 yards, so not a bad outing from him. Keelan Cole, he led the Jags in receiving with 6 receptions for 143 yards. DJ Chark, he's dealing with the ankle injury. He was a kind of a risk to play. From a PPR standpoint, not a terrible game, but still his upside wasn't there. And then Laviska Shenault, he was 3 for 10. So he's been having a decent season so far. They use him in so many different ways. They rush the ball with him. He obviously catches the ball, but just based on the matchup, not a very good outing from Laviska Shenault. So overall, the highlight of this game is DeAndre Swift breaking out. And then going on to the Jets versus the Dolphins, I don't know what to say about this game other than the Dolphins. This is the first shutout that we've had this season. The Dolphins won this 24-0. I don't know what to say about Adam Gase and the New York Jets. I mean, this whole team is completely in disarray. If you're a listener and you're a Jets fan, what are you hoping for? What are you hoping for when it comes to, do you fire Adam Gase now? Do you let him finish off the season? Are you hoping that you guys just lose the rest of your games to get Trevor Lawrence? What's the plan? Because this is not me knocking you guys, because I think the New York Jets obviously need to make a change at the coaching position, because I don't know exactly where they're going in, because there was talks about them trying to trade away Sam Darnold. You obviously see that Joe Flacco is not the answer. He's definitely just not doing well. But I don't know. I think that the writing's on the wall, but we'll see what happens. But from the Dolphins standpoint, Fitzmagic, he had 191 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. So he was a streamer this week for me. Obviously, he didn't do bad for you. He did have the 2 interceptions, but he at least got you the 3 touchdowns. And what was cool about this game from the quarterback position, Tua came in after the game was obviously out of reach. He came in for the last 2 minutes. And what's cool about this, a lot from a medical standpoint, so obviously you guys know that I'm in the medical field, and seeing what he did last year where he got hurt, fractured his hip, dislocated his hip, and then he finally came back to play an NFL game was a surreal moment. Obviously his family wasn't there to watch this game because he had no idea he was going to play. But if you saw, some of his pictures went viral. I don't know if you saw the picture, but Tua was sitting where his drive ended. He had 2 completions and then 2 good throws, and then he FaceTimed his family from the spot that that he played from. So a great moment. I think Tua has some future in this league. Obviously, there's still concerns about his hip, but it was just cool to see that, him FaceTime his family after the game. But going to the running back, position, Myles Gaskin had a good outing. He had 18 carries for 91 yards, and he added another 4 receptions for 35 yards. So Myles Gaskin continues to have a safe floor, I think. So in the running back position for the Jets, I mean, it's whatever. And then when it comes to receiving, Brashad Perriman. So this was his first game coming back from injury. Not a bad game for coming back. He had 4 receptions for 62 yards. So, he had 6 receptions. Jameson Crowder had 7 receptions. Chris Herndon was non-existent there. Preston Williams had another touchdown, but Preston Williams, he didn't have a lot of usage. Him and Devontae Parker, the only difference between him and Devontae Parker is that Preston Williams had the touchdown. Mike Gesicki, very disappointing outing from him. He had a goose egg yesterday, so if you played Mike Gesicki, you're disappointed based on the matchup, based on what he's been doing the whole season. But Mike Gesicki has been, reliable until this game. But now we're going on to the Packers versus the Bucks. So this game, the Bucks won 38-10. They scored 38 unanswered points. And as a Bucks fan, this was a very, very surprising win in the sense of the Packers come in this game as the number 1 offense. They're scoring 30-plus points per game. You got a Bucks defense who struggle against the pass. Their bread and butter is stopping the run. But I was very surprised. Like the beginning of this game, the Packers were going up and down the field on the Bucs and scored 10 points, and I was like, here we go. We're going to be just embarrassed, like we were embarrassed Thursday Night Football against the Giants or against the Bears, and like now we see them just completely blow up the Packers spot yesterday. And Rodgers, he struggled all game. He until the first, once he threw his first interception, he was doing well. They went right down the field and scored. Then he threw a pick six. Then he threw another pick, and then it seemed like after that he couldn't come back. And interesting thing, I was watching Colin Cowherd this morning, and I didn't really notice the stat, but at any point that Aaron Rodgers has trailed in any game, he has a below 500 winning percentage. So that's a very interesting stat to determine. Like, if Aaron Rodgers is ever behind, he does not have, he doesn't have the winning, the wins loss. He doesn't have the wins to back up his greatness. I think obviously Aaron Rodgers is a completely gifted, one of the best throws in the NFL. He continues to be a Hall of Famer. He is elite. But I didn't realize that he had such a hard time coming from behind. So that was an interesting stat that I saw this morning. But I do think the funny thing about this was that when he almost had a rushing touchdown yesterday, and I don't know if you everyone ever watched Key and Peele, but he did a touchdown dance that was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. There was a skit that Key and Peele did about him, a person scoring a touchdown and kind of doing hip thrust, and he did that, and by far one of the best TD celebrations I've saw, even though the touchdown got taken back. But overall, it was a rough game for Aaron Rodgers. He almost scored 4 fantasy points. So, but on the other side of the ball, Tom Brady, he didn't have to do much. Like I said, the defense really took care of this game for Tom Brady. He did have 2 touchdowns. He had 166 yards passing, so not an awful game from Tom Brady, but obviously with the game script the way it was, it limited his upside. And then Aaron Jones, bad game from Aaron Jones. He did score a touchdown, but other than that, he was kept in check the whole entire game. Ronald Jones had his third 100-yard game of the season. He's the only player so far this season who's had 3 100-yard games in a row, so kudos to him. He's definitely the starter. There's no question that even with Leonard Fournette back, I just don't think Ronald Jones is going to lose much touches. Ronald Jones continues to show that he deserves to be the starter. And then from the Bucs standpoint, from the wide receiver position, Godwin and Evans were held in check. I mean, Evans had 1 catch. Devontae Adams, he was 6 for 61, didn't score, but he had 10 targets, so we knew that was going to be the case. And then Robert Tonyan, so this was one of the number 1 waiver wire pickups from, the week where he scored 3 touchdowns. He didn't do much. He did lead the game for a few plays because of an injury, but he came back. But the story here was Gronk. Gronk, he had 5 receptions for 78 yards and a touchdown. He doesn't look like the old Gronk, but it was cool to see him finally be involved in this offense, see him score a touchdown. He didn't have a very good spike because he said his right shoulder was hurting, so you had to do a left-handed spike. But overall, it was good to see Gronk. Now I got to determine, is this a fluke game or is this Gronk finally being put in this offense where they know that he can use him as a weapon? Because, like I said, Evans and Godwin both had quiet games, which allowed Gronk to be, involved a little bit more. So we'll see. It's one of those things where if you have Gronk, maybe you wait and see. You keep him on your bench just for now. But I think overall, it was good to see, Brady and Gronk connect again. And then going to the Sunday Night Football game, this is a weird game. The Rams, they lose this game 24-16 to the 49ers. And this was pretty much all the 49ers. I mean, they came out and scored 21 points immediately. Jimmy G had 268 yards and 3 touchdowns. Completely night and day difference between what he did against the Dolphins the week before. But it shows another week, rehabbing his ankle. He was able to get his footing. His mechanics were a lot better. So you saw Jimmy G finally have a good game. No turnovers. They didn't get any sacks. The Rams got no sacks yesterday. George Kittle, he had a good game. He was 7 for 109 and a touchdown. Deebo Samuel had a good game. He was 6 for 66 and a touchdown. So overall, good game. Raheem Mostert, he started off the game doing well. He injured himself again, so Jerick McKinnon came in and whatnot. So it definitely is frustrating for Raheem Mostert owners because he came back, you probably started him, and then he goes back out again. So it's we don't know the severity yet, but overall just just a one-sided game because Jared Goff did have 2 touchdowns. Robert Woods had a touchdown. Darrell Henderson, he continues to be the lead back, and everyone's talking about Cam Akers, and he only got 1 carry last night, so I don't know exactly where they're going to use Cam Akers, but as of right now, it looks like it's between Darrell Henderson and Malcolm Brown so far. But overall, that's the Week 6 matchups. That's all my reactions to the Week 6 matchups. Now today we have an early game. We have 2 games. We have the Chiefs versus the Bills. That game starts at 5 o'clock Eastern, at 2 o'clock on the West Coast. And then we have our Monday night game on ESPN. We have the Cardinals versus the Cowboys. So obviously that's going to be an interesting game to kind of see exactly how Andy Dalton does with the Cowboys against the Cardinals. But that's going to be an interesting game for fantasy because I know I'm down in my league. I got CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill going today, so hopefully I'm able to win my game. I'm down by 17 points, so hopefully I'm able to get 17 points out of the 2 of them. But those are the 2 games today. And then going to the end of the episode with all the studs of the week. So a quarterback, Deshaun Watson, he was the number 1 quarterback as of right now. He scored 40.3 fantasy points. Matt Ryan was second with 39.72, and then Ryan Tannehill had 36.78. Ryan Tannehill, he was a guy that I had ranked as one of those guys that I feel like can continue what he did last year. I know last year he was very efficient with he came in and took over from Marcus Mariota. But I don't think this is a fluke. I think we're seeing exactly the talent of Ryan Tannehill and the offense that he's in. He obviously benefits from having Derrick Henry as his running back because it opens up so much in the passing game because they were so fearful of Derrick Henry going off like he did yesterday. But Ryan Tannehill continues to be a solid starter. And at the running back position, obviously King Henry, he was the lead back he had 40.4 PPR points. Just a monster game from him. DeAndre Swift, he was second with 27.3. And then Ronald Jones, he was 26.1 fantasy points yesterday. At wide receiver, Justin Jefferson, he led the wide receivers this week with 39.6 points. Julio Jones was 33.7, and then Will Fuller was 24.3. Obviously, this is also pending what happens tonight with Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, so all that stuff could change. But as of right now, as of Monday morning, these are the leaders. And that at the tight end position, very interesting names, right? So Jonnu Smith went out with the ankle injury yesterday, which meant Anthony Firkser, if I'm saying that right, the backup tight end for the Tennessee Titans, he had 25.3 fantasy points, so big game from him. He would have been a waiver wire claim this week if Smith was out, but it looks like Smith's going to play, so I wouldn't pick him up. And then George Kittle, 23.9 fantasy points, good game from him. And then Trey Burton, he ended the week with 29.9 fantasy points. So overall, those are the studs of the week. So as of right now, as week 6 sits right now, what do you guys need to win this week? Who do you have playing tonight? Because there's a lot of fantasy points that could be added to your games this week. Who do you have left to play? What do you need to win? Leave a comment below and let's chat back and forth on what you need and just talk about the game. So that ends the show today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, comment, and share this podcast. On the next episode for tomorrow, I'll be going over all the top waiver wire pickups for week 7. So hit subscribe so you don't miss that episode. If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us at The Gridiron Pod on Facebook and Twitter. On Instagram, we're at Gridiron Fantasy Football. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening, and good luck tonight. If you have any players playing tonight, hopefully you're able to win your matchup. But we'll see you all in tomorrow's episode. Take care.